Encuentro, a magical meeting, a coming together. I always feel my ancestors and my father guiding the way to meeting people that are making significant change in my life and our community. You see, in 2011, I was doing pro bono work as a therapist in my community of Half Moon Bay, 25 miles from here in a rural community. A little girl was referred to me after being here at Stanford with the best and brightest doctors, trying to figure out why she was having so many stomach pains after almost a year of in and out of emergency rooms and hospitals in pain, and found out that I think it's emotional. So they sent her to me. And it was in our time together that I realized she held so much worry about being Latina, about being a Mexican girl in Half Moon Bay, wanting to hide her identity, her Spanish, and in many ways had been forced to carry shame. But yet, even in that, she brought joy and happiness, and we couldn't quite figure out what was wrong, what were causing these pains, until one day she took out an art pad and she sat silently next to me without saying a word. She grabbed a marker and she drew a big circle, and then she drew a small circle right beside it, and she drew cat ears, and then the nose and the whiskers and the mouth, and above it she put mama cat, and then the same with the little cat, and she put baby cat. And then she drew big tears coming down their faces. She looked at me, did not say a word, but picked up a black marker and put a huge X, crossed out the mama cat. And above it, she quietly wrote, "No papers." And above the baby cat, she wrote, "Papers." And then she looked at me with tears in her eyes and said, "What is a baby cat going to do when the mama cat is taken away?" It was that moment I understood the chronic pain she had been holding for years, the pain of so many other children I had seen and never understood because they didn't speak about this. They couldn't tell this story. But this is what I know is immigration trauma. This is what I understand is what I call undocumented trauma. This is a trauma that's not in the DSM, but is real. And so I had to figure out a way to help Sophia rise up, to help her be safe. I couldn't compete with the politics of immigration, but I could find a healing modality for her. And so I dug deep into my own soul to connect with what did she need, what was a medicine we could give her in what seemed in many ways hopeless. And I remembered the story of me as a young girl. I grew up in rural Texas and in many ways had to be forced to assimilate, to lose my language, to lose my identity, because they told us that if you want to get to where you need to go, you had to lose your culture in the town that I was raised in. But I also remember that I had an opportunity to live in the Panama Canal, and my parents would take me to these spaces where we would see the dancers dancing, the Panamanian dancers dancing with their beautiful dresses, and they would sing and they would perform, and my soul was filled with this magical pride I can't explain. And that is the power of cultura. Culture. And it was a medicine that I wanted to bring to Sophia to say, you can feel proud of who you are too. I wanted to create a cocoon of culture, wrap her up in a space where she could feel safe and proud, and her family and the many other children that were scared. And so we began the program of Alas. Alas in Spanish means wings. And it was a place that we built with a lot of love and care to grow mental health services, to grow the arts, a ballet folklorico, mariachi, accordion, dancing, a farm worker program, education, research, and more. But as I grew this work, I kept telling funders and philanthropists, please, can you fund this program? Because we want to grow alas for more children. 33% of our community is Latino, 55% are Latino and Latinx in the school district, and we wanted to do more. And funders kept telling me, Belinda, you have a beautiful song and dance program, but we need evidence. Where's the evidence that this is really about mental health?
Meanwhile, I was working at Stanford in the pediatric emergency department. I sometimes wonder if I had met Sophia. My research was involved with large data sets looking at access to emergency care by vulnerable populations, including immigrants. In 2018, when Trump's child separation policies became known, and when there was the huge overcrowding and deaths at the border, I served as a child welfare expert for the lawyers who were the lawyers of these children. I remember trying to brace myself for the interviews of these children, and the distress that I had anticipated was profound. But I saw something that I hadn't expected at all. One of the interviews was with a 13-year-old girl, but she came to the interview with a 2-year-old who was hanging onto her hand. And Maria, the 13-year-old, explained that when she had arrived at the detention facility, this little girl came out of nowhere and just grabbed her hand and wouldn't let go. So Maria scooped up the little girl, whose name she didn't know, sat her in the lap, and continued to explain that she had asked the other families in the cells. She had asked the Border Patrol if anybody knew where her family was. Nobody knew. So Maria had taken care of this little girl. She had slept with her. She had fed her. She had tried to play with her while they were waiting. I also remember a little girl, maybe 8 years old, who came to the interview where her eyes were shining bright. She was so excited that she was in the United States and she was going to San Francisco to see her mother, who she hadn't seen since she was a baby. And I was so touched by the caring and the bravery and the hope that these children had, and realized also that their telling their story was a way of hope and of strength. Now, after the child separation policy and things at the border calmed down a little bit, I asked myself and my colleagues, well, what now? I felt that undoing was not enough. It was the lawyer's job to undo the cruel detention policies that were in place. But I was just a doctor, and what I wanted was to ensure that the children that I had met and other children like them would, when they met their families, have a chance to heal from their traumatic journeys, but not just heal, go to school and learn and grow and thrive, just like my children. But how? There's very little known about these children and the best programs for them. We needed to research into providing the best models.
Encuentro. The word literally means a coming together, a meeting one another. Something magical, soulful, a connection, unexpected, a wonder.
So Belinda and I were destined to meet. We'd already heard each other's names, we had been referred to each other, but never met in person. Until one day I was tired of Zoom, tired of those little squares, turned off my computer and decided to go to Alice's bi-monthly food drives. And when I got there, my breath was just taken away. The whole community was out there lined in the streets, distributing food. And Alice's headquarters is this bright yellow and pink house with these murals up and down the driveway. And then I went inside, and the pink walls were covered with these photographs of these kids in traditional costume, dancing and singing and playing the guitar. And the joy on the walls just made me laugh.
I couldn't help but tell Ewen the stories about how the children were thriving, how we were seeing a difference, that families were connecting, that they were building bridges, that they were rising up, that actually the arts was an act of resistance. And I explained to Ewen that this was cultura cura in action, cultural healing, the medicine of our community coming alive. But how could we prove this with research?
And I was so excited when I heard Belinda talk about cultura cura. Because in the research that I was doing, I was finding that there were a lot of organizations and programs providing resources in separate times and in places for individual kids and families, not taking into account, not having time to take into account where they were from. And Cultura Cura realized that these kids did not come empty-handed. They came with a strong foundation and strength and resilience and culture. And that's when I knew we had to work together. And I asked Belinda, would you like to do some research together?
Well, at first I was a little hesitant because for so long we have known that research is sometimes done to us, not with us. But after meeting with Ewen and Ryan and numerous Stanford team members, I felt a real commitment and care that they were really there to be united in this work. And so we said, yes, let's join together to do and tell the story that we had but had not been able to be shared widely.
So we use Stanford resources and our expertise with the help of the Impact Labs and other Stanford organizations. And we took very good care to see what ALAS wanted out of the research. We did the questions and formatted the program the way they wanted. Now, there were some hiccups because even though well-intentioned, Stanford is a large academic organization and not completely used to working with community as a full partner. So we had to resolve some IRB issues back and forth for months, some confidentiality. We had to decide who owned the data and be able to compensate our community members fully. But we did it.
We did it, and we had the evidence all along. The stories of the children, the stories of the family, the stories of the community. When we did our investigation and our work, we got to hear from them even more. And it brought us back to one moment when we saw this little boy, what we're calling cultural sensory, because everybody understands that sensory integration is so important for healing trauma. But have we ever thought of what does cultural sensory look like? And it was a moment that I walked in and this little boy was standing there zapateando with all his heart, which means he was stomping and dancing and almost as to dance out his fear, his worry, his anxiety, and then came up for air with the music. And they told us, the mothers told us how this was breaking down barriers in their families, crossing borders, going home through the song, through the canto, to abuelos, to grandparents, to be able to go places where they weren't able to travel because of status. And children taught us about becoming cultural stewards and how proud they were to wear the trajes or to sing or to dance or to perform. We heard the parents talk about how walking in the pumpkin parade was a sign of not just the arts, but of resistance and of saying, we will never be invisible again. They are the evidence.
Nuestro Encuentro. a coming together of academia and community, more specifically Stanford and ALAS and all of the community that we have now formed. I told Belinda that I was going to invite you all to the ALAS little house, and you can bask in the cultura cura there and plan the next Encuentro.